My son was diagnosed in 2006, and I began hearing about RDI pretty early on. Um, he was diagnosed in August of '06, and by September, October, I had heard about RDI from the psychologist who had evaluated him, who was primarily an ABA psychologist, a very nice person. And she said, oh, I have some families who do RDI with ABA. Can you believe it? And I didn't know what she meant. And so I went and I researched it. And at that time, I was on a floor time chat group and I asked others about it. And then I joined the RDI chat group that was pretty informal years ago, '06, '07. And someone mentioned the DVD to me. And so I rented that from the kind of local special needs library here in Columbus, Ohio. And I watched the entire thing by myself straight through. Was it 5 hours? It was a long time. And I felt so moved and inspired. I knew I had to do it personally and professionally. So at that point, I found Amy Lucas outside of Chicago and flew to her just before Thanksgiving of '06. So he was just diagnosed and we had an ABA program started. And Amy helped us extensively. And I started the professional training after 6 months of being a parent. And then at that point, I heard about Heather Benner-Ohl here in Columbus, where I am. So I switched due to proximity. Amy was wonderful, and Heather Benner-Ohl has been just a brilliant consultant for us. And it has been an extremely meaningful process. I have multiple things that I could discuss about how RDI has helped us. But first, let me talk about what I had a difficult time with ABA and floor time. And then, so with floor time, my son at that point was very passive, and I couldn't follow him in anything, and it didn't seem like something that fit with my personality as much. And then it was a little too unstructured for me. And then with ABA, because I did have at that point already a PhD in psychology, I knew about behavioral techniques and modification, and I wasn't that interested in it. I've always been more interested in the psyche and the mind. And so when I learned about the principles and the tenets and the techniques of RDI, it seemed to fit so much with me and my emphasis on the emotional realm, my emphasis on the mind and on interpersonal relationships. And I found it to be very creative, and I am interested in creating things and tailoring it to the child. And I did very much at that point need to have the feeling of agency as a parent, because in addition, we had just moved to Columbus, and that was a very hard time for me because it would have been very different if I had lived in the city for 20 years and then had a son who was diagnosed. But he was 11 months when we moved to Columbus, and it took us about a year to even recognize what was going on because we were so focused on moving. So I needed kind of like something to ground me, and I didn't feel like the other modalities gave me enough tools to ground me. And so I adhered myself to the paradigm very tightly as a way to give me strength and courage and kind of like as a guide or an anchor, because I was very lost. And that piece, particularly '06, '07, '08, '09, when I was still trying to come to terms with the diagnosis and the pain of that, it helped me feel less lonely. It helped me feel more competent, more equipped, more patient. So it really did help me cope quite a bit. Well, I would say it was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. I've lost a parent since then, and my son Liam being diagnosed was even harder than losing my parent. It wasn't a sudden loss of my parent. But you expect that with a parent, that that's going to happen. And you don't expect that this is going to happen with your child. And embarrassingly, I really had no experience with disabilities before, even though I was in the mental health field. I was primarily a psychotherapist and focusing on the mind and, some psychiatric issues, but not developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities. So it really, I felt rudderless for a long time, and I have told several people that I felt like my brain was splitting in two for a while. And my husband had more experience with physical disability with his father, and he could, kind of roll with it and stomach it more. I'm kind of a more anxious person than he is, and he's very subdued, and I'm kind of more animated and energetic, um, and I think we were actually in denial for about a year in '05, thinking it couldn't be. I mean, it doesn't look textbook, and how could it be? So we only got the diagnosis once I knew myself for certain, because I was too afraid to even go to a psychologist, because that's what I do, and so I only felt like I could go get the diagnosis just when I knew that it was just a formality for benefits and the IEP, and I never have read the evaluation, which I now don't look at as negative, because I'm not a very detailed person anyway. I look at the big picture more, and I don't get fixated on numbers, and particularly after Dr. Gutstein's lectures about the IQ points and how that doesn't predict anything with autism. I never have really cared much about the points about anything really. Even though, I do these tests, in my practice, I view, the RDI assessments as more substantive and dynamic than the standardized assessments that are traditionally done. So I have often said I don't need to see it. So that has been, I don't think I would have been freed of that if I hadn't have started RDI. It's been freeing, is one way I could put it. It's interesting. How do I put this? I started feeling successful pretty soon, because I worked really hard, because I'm kind of a type A kind of person, and I scheduled what I was going to do. But for me to feel natural in it, I felt like the learning curve emotionally and intellectually took me several months for me to feel like it was really part of my lifestyle. And I think because it's, these principles are brilliant, and it takes a while to kind of digest them and absorb them. But now that I've been doing it for, I guess, what now is it 2006 to 2015. What is that? 9 years? I'm not good at math. It feels kind of like it's my language, but I've told families that it's okay if it feels kind of strange at first, that it can take a while to feel like you've got your sea legs on with it. But I think, each person is different. Like I said, I'm kind of a more high-strung person, and while that worked really well for me to understand the goals, for me to actually embody them involved me letting go of some of my anxiety, accepting what is, not expecting a performance from him, not expecting certain milestones. So it was more kind of go with the flow and be part of the process. And so that it took me a while, but I feel like I'm definitely there. And we all know, I mean, sometimes we're not seeing the gains that we're hoping. And so I have really, I mean, Dr. Gutstein has said several times it's okay to take breaks, as has our consultant. And my sister-in-law would sometimes say to me, Audrey, it's okay for sometimes to expect nothing, just to expect nothing. And so I feel comfortable taking breaks if I feel, kind of like I'm burnt out or he's burnt out. And I have taken a lot of what Dr. Gutstein and Shealy have said to heart in terms of not every day, not every moment has to be productive, because I'm achievement oriented myself, and I like to be very productive and active. Yes. And that it has helped a great deal to say, hey, and then I remember all the times where no one had a plan for me as a child, and that's fine. It doesn't have to always be planned. But I think because our children are often not initiating much or providing spontaneous ideas as much as our typical children, then sometimes it forces us, if we feel lost or feel anxious, to try to plan and overcompensate. And, that's that whole thing of like that pseudo regulation that we sometimes find ourselves in as parents. But I think it's been very, very helpful to be reflective about it and to, kind of be insightful about ourselves as well. I have also, I took a lot, I remembered a lot of what Dr. Gutstein said about speech, and that many people on the spectrum speak without ever taking speech, and many take 20 years of speech and don't speak. And our son at 11, and I'm not saying speech doesn't help, because I think once speech begins, speech classes can help, speech therapy can help, but I don't know if speech therapy could ever necessarily evoke speech in someone if they're nonverbal. And at 11, our son is nonverbal, and I, talked about how we worked around that with his typing, but recognizing that getting him in speech is imperative. I have him in speech at his school, but I haven't been aggressive with it for years. And I have felt like that's taken me out of what I call the circuit, when you feel like you're, like Dr. Gutstein says, you're not a chauffeur, right? When you're driving to OT, and then you're driving to speech, and then you're driving to music therapy, and then you're getting fast food because you're not cooking the dinner. And I did the slow down type of thing, and I have been very selective in what I sign us up for. And I think I said, when I sent Kat some of my bullet points, a lot of what I've done, I don't want it to sound kind of pretentious or trendy, but I have focused kind of like on more the classic way of raising kids, where we have dinner every night at the table, and no one leaves the table until everyone is done, and it's family style. We don't have television in our living room. I have them do a lot of chores. It's almost like my husband is kind of made fun of me. It's almost like, back to the farm type of thing.
I like it.
Going with the food that many of us choose to serve in terms of, more natural and that sort of thing. But that has helped me slow down as well. And it's also helped me with my typical child, because, for instance, we do K-12, we do a hybrid of autism school that really lets me provide my opinion and my preference. Mm-hmm. And then we do, part-time homeschooling, and we do K-12. And our son was supposed to read Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. And I knew that he could read, and I figured, well, this time I'm going to read the whole novel to the whole family and do 3 chapters a night for 9 nights. There was 27 chapters. And have both kids do listening comprehension, and has my husband do listening comprehension too. And so we made it like a family thing that we don't do it when we have TV. we don't think about, before television, we had to think about, hangman, tic-tac-toe, like all of those things that you do without media.
It's true.
So we have incorporated things like that as well. So I think it's helped my my approach with parenting, which I think before, despite my psychology training, I didn't really have much of a vision of what I wanted to do, and now I'm much more deliberate with it. So we're not, as you can tell the picture, we're not strict about, not leaving the table. There's more kind of flow and openness, it's more casual, but there's still like that rule, that you don't leave until everybody's done. And, our son eats quite a bit, so he should eat the last one anyway. But I know, Kat had mentioned that we don't necessarily need to provide explanation, but this was a Thanksgiving where, when you talk about like physical framing and scaffolding, people may have always asked me, why are you getting your turkey ready on the floor? Well, I had a larger field that way on the floor, and I could keep him in my lap. He was 3 here, I think, and we have done a big scrapbook over the years where we've taken lots of pictures and used the scrapbook as part of the spotlighting, to, evoke a sense of competence. So then I felt like I could command his attention more if I had him seated in my lap. I had, I guess, for lack of a better word, more control. Well, that's a great question. I think that if you're in a social world and thinking about social variables, it's you feel kind of, at least I can speak for myself here, marginalized, and kind of like on an alien planet. And I had felt at the beginning, and sometimes still do, the things that people say if they're trying to be helpful, they're not being critical, feel kind of hollow, have felt hollow to me. And that has felt alienating at times. And unless I get along with the parents, unless I would have gotten along with the parents anyway, I haven't felt much solidarity in Columbus, unless they're kind of the RDI mentality, because it's, like a similar culture. And then sometimes I have felt, and I don't feel this way with the RDI parents, but I have felt sometimes that the other parents talk about all these gains that have been made, that you want to talk about that, obviously, but that you feel further alone because they're not really asking you about you or talking about their struggles and revealing their vulnerabilities. And maybe that's their own defenses, but that part has been hard. And I'm an only child of divorced parents, and like I said, we had just moved to Columbus. So it was a very strange process for me, very surreal, like going to, as every city has, certain places that you take your kids, and exploring those places for the first time, but then also kind of being terrified and horrified, what's happening to his mind. And so there are areas of town that I used to avoid, because it would bring back so many painful memories, that now I just feel kind of more equipped. And it's the passage of time, but it's also the idea that I have been more enriched by this program and just feel more confident, I guess.
I was just sharing with a friend that, and I think this is one thing that's important related to RDI, that when we had our diagnosis, it was a couple of years in, and we had to move for financial strains, and we moved into a rent house, and I don't remember how the next door neighbor found out about my son, but she came over to visit with me, and she, I didn't know her, and she said, your life is my worst nightmare. And I said, I'm sorry. And she said, your life. That's my worst nightmare, having one of my children have autism. And I think that one of the reasons we feel isolated is because well-meaning people say really amazing things to us. And I don't mean amazing in a good way.
I have often had the experience, I guess, because of my profession as well, that people assume that I have it all together, right? And I work hard on, you know, having balance. But years ago, I would have people call me and say, I am so terrified. I think my son has autism. Please tell me what your son was like. And I don't want this. And it was just kind of like, and I even struggle when I hear, about the whole people who decide they don't want to vaccinate, not because of that decision itself, but the idea of the other people's fear of that. Yeah. I mean, I don't have an opinion about that decision about the vaccinations, but the fear behind it, and that people are and then acting like I am able to just be objective and say, oh, okay, let me, when it's still a very personal experience. And this is my typical daughter and my son. They have a very good relationship, which I really do attribute to having learned about RDI. And even though I don't want to sound negative, one of the benefits that I've found from it is to, pull away from the traditional ABA in the home. I don't mind some of the ABA techniques for like learning to tie your shoe or that sort of thing, the OT stuff. But because I ceased, and I think each parent, it's their own journey about how they want to do that. But because I ceased the ABA gradually, my life became less disjointed, and he wasn't, it was in our finished attic, and he wasn't kind of like relegated to his, his sessions, his treatment. Then he did become, like Dr. Gutstein says, like everybody deserves to be a part of the family. I'm paraphrasing what he said. But so that has worked out well. And even though I've never heard Dr. Gutstein talk about this particular principle, I got a lot from the Hot List books that we read many years ago. And the book, Cognitive Apprenticeship, one of the sentences that she talks about at the end is that siblings, and she's not talking about autism per se, but siblings, because they don't know how to be tactful, they give feedback sometimes that's useful for the child to know. And that has worked out well for my son, getting feedback from my typical daughter, and then we type about it. So that has been an interesting, process for us. And then on the right is my husband with my son. The bottom is same time frame as the turkey. And then the top is last summer, looking at some of the outdoor framing techniques. And he was, seated, and my husband would give him a seat, and then my son would put it in the ground. Because he has very profound dyspraxia, there's a lot of fine motor stuff that we still need to help him with. And what's interesting, we have done a lot of cooking over the years, and just tonight I was, kind of in my own zone, and just had a squash that I was chopping for, just had some pork chops and just putting stuff on the stove, and wasn't really thinking about incorporating him. I just wanted to, was talking to my Medicaid provider, and I was, and then I moved away, and he walked right over, grabbed the knife, and just began chopping the squash, and then was eager to chop the onions. And I just thought, wow, it's that's a new thing. But he feels competent. I've taught him. He enjoys doing it, and he just initiated that. So I was like, how darling. Similar to what's what is commonly found, where the woman initiates more of it in the beginning. And what had happened was this, I hope others find interesting. I had, found all sorts of things by the time that I had come across RDI. And once I went to the professional training, they weren't really, thinking about it much, and I had typed everything out and I began crying, and I said, listen, I don't want you to just kind of like zone out here. This is very, very, very important to me. Please, please listen to this. This really means a lot to me. And that helped to, because my mom at that point, she's passed away, but she was living with us and helping us. And so, she got along great with us and with my husband, and they both recognized the meaning that it had to me. And my mom struggled with it as a grandparent, not with wanting to do it or the approach at all, but just with her effectiveness, because she was, like, wanted to prompt a lot, and but we got a lot of laughs out of it. We got a lot of laughs. So, we had a great sense of humor about it. And we still, we always had a mother's helper for our son through Medicaid that helped us, because my husband works in Michigan and we're in Ohio. So we had, in the beginning, we had Joanna, who's worked with us since '07, and my mom and me and my husband. So Liam had 4 adults that he had to.
Wow.
But we had a lot of fun too, in terms of making fun of ourselves. And I really like to plan. When I say activities, I don't mean just the RDI activities, but I like to plan activities for people in general. So I really like to plan these types of things. And I remember Heather Ohl had said to us early on, well, each evening, if you can, think about, I may be paraphrasing what she said, but what I took from it was, think about what you have to do the next day and how you can incorporate him in that. Mm-hmm. And while that's harder, with a second child, and as I've aged and I still, have a demanding career, I enjoyed lying in bed and planning what that would be. Mm. And that gave me a sense of peace and even a ritual for myself, and what I would do, because I felt so helpless in the beginning, and this made me feel like I could kind of take the bull by the horns. And even when he didn't always respond the way I wanted him to respond, which I think I probably had planned too much, sometimes I wasn't as natural as I could have been because of my own anxiety. And I don't know if, I don't think this is what Dr. Gutstein said, but what I ended up discovering is saying to myself, well, at least I did my part, and I planned it. I did it the way I wanted it to be. I planned it, and I'm providing him experiences and a framework, and I can't always control how that's gonna land on him, but I'm providing him an enriching environment. And I've always been very focused on the processes of the mind. And at my training, Peter Hobson was there, and his wife as well, Jessica Hobson. And while I didn't speak to him, one of the women I had befriended, Stacy Testis, at the training, had said that he had said to her, just kind of at a happy hour or something, yes, there are cognitive pathways, but there are also emotional pathways. And he wrote The Cradle of Thought, which I got a lot out of reading that. And that has stuck with me too. And I kind of think now, as a psychologist too, that the cognitive pathways are blocked if there aren't also emotional pathways to help those cognitive pathways work, and I know that with psychiatric patients. But so it kind of all feeds into itself, and I am kind of more interested in like the emotional pathways, and that lead to the dynamic thinking, I guess, than the rote cognitive stuff. One of the things that I've gained a lot from RDI is the idea that you learn to teach what's important to you, and that in a typical relationship, and I often think before all this media, you know, you teach your child to fish because you love to fish. You teach your child to be a carpenter because you're a carpenter. And so I have always been very interested in writing. And so because my son types, that has made me really focus on his writing, but I've also been able to extend that to our typical daughter. So at the museums,
Thank you.
we would they'd pick an artwork, and my dad was with me to, help me. He would work with my daughter and I would work with my son. And they had, to write their, like a thought paper or their reaction to the artwork, to kind of work on their writing, because that's always been very important to me, and I think it's a lost skill. So outside of like the formal RDI, what I've been able to internalize is, hey, reading is very important to me, writing is very important to me, the theater is very important to me, and cooking healthy food. And I've been able to teach him those things, and he's typed that he wants to be a chef, he wants to be a writer. So I have felt like I've been able to, kind of guide him in what's always been important to me. One of the other things that I feel like I have really gained from RDI is what not to do, even though that seems kind of critical or negative. But even though I'm okay with reinforcers to a degree, seldomly done for both children, when I do a reinforcer, I do it for both children, and it's never a pattern or a habit. And rarely will I do an edible reinforcer. And I have really internalized the idea of that competence is the best reinforcer. And so I feel like I've gotten out of that trap that's easy to fall into, which then makes the child basically rule the roost and control the house. And that has been very freeing, and I don't feel the need to do any of that. And if other parents are there still, I mean, just consider that, that's a process, and it may not be value of yours, but it was a value of mine. And I feel that I've been able to free myself of that. That feels very, very liberating and powerful. It's a lot to learn the treatment modality, and aside from RDI, it's a lot to even be in this position. And I've often said that the position is so unnatural as a parent of a person with autism, because you then have depleted internal resources that you have to work on maintaining that they are still there. But this environment almost expects you to have unlimited external resources and internal resources, but both get depleted, and you have to work on that balance. And that's, the whole cliche of it's a marathon. But, I in the beginning, with RDI, I felt stiff, and I think it was just my own anxiety of adjusting to the situation. I like what Dr. Gutstein said. I mean, none of this is really my idea, right? But that it's okay to take breaks. And I like the idea that just start with what you can start with, and don't worry about it must be such number of hours. But I do think it's important to plan when you're going to try it out, make it happen, strive for, that objective or activity or goal, or just decide, today I'm tired, I'm just going to do declarative language. That I have also liked the fact that I like the scrapbook, and that's also good work, because it's spotlighting those episodic memories and those feelings of competence, and that is also work, but it's fun. So that I've liked because I like working on the emotions and like, wow, this is great. I can do this scrapbook with them, and I'm actually like, this is so productive and enriching, um, that it's okay to take breaks. I've taken extended breaks. Um, and if there's an electronics component, if you can work with a consultant on fading that,
Yes.
because I think that that's very important to fade. Um, I also have embodied the idea of not talking about the child in front of him or her.
Me too.
That has helped me, and now that I know my son understands everything, it has made a difference. And if you don't know what to do nothing, which is like the stopping the action, which I have
Yeah.
almost like
Yeah.
if you don't know what to say, don't say anything. Or
Actually, that's been
um,
very freeing, I think.
yeah, oh yeah.
I'm
And then
doing RDI, I'm doing nothing.
yeah, I'm just sit. It's okay. I can just sit here, right?
Yeah.
And us Westerners have a harder time with that maybe, but I don't really put much emphasis on performance with him at all. I mean, I don't have him work on his speech anymore. And I just kind of let it all be a process and a flow. I focus on flow more. Um, and I really think it's important to like the good enough thinking that Dr. Gutstein talks about. I think that's very, very important, not just for teaching our children, but for us ourselves, in terms of not everything has to be just so, or because that will drive you crazy.